Hello everyone and welcome to another Top 5 Records video. And today I'm going to be ranking and counting down all studio albums by Simon and Garfunkel, which is a very difficult task because at a certain moment the amount of quality is so incredible that ranking is very tough. And I think that at a certain moment they have this Beatles level, like the second half of the 60s, the Beatles, every new album was just, what's going on here? Simon and Garfunkel have that as well. They have that level of quality. Something is just amazing about them. But without further ado, I'm going to kick off the list. Hi, Lay. This is my dog, Layla. With at the sixth spot. And I found the sixth spot the easiest spot because there you have her again. I'm going to put the Graduate soundtrack on the sixth spot. Why am I gonna kick it off with the Graduate soundtrack? Not that it's a bad soundtrack. Far from. I think this is a very interesting collaboration. Initially, Paul Simon was reluctant to work for a motion picture because he thought it was selling out. But Mike Nichols sent him the screenplay. He talked about his intentions with the film. And the bizarre thing is, I'm not sure if Paul Simon knew where he was stepping into, but The Graduate in the language of film, in the world of film, is one of the important moments in cinema. Because The Graduate was made at the moment in which Hollywood did not know what to do next. There were big productions that were flopping, like the famous Cleopatra film with Elizabeth Taylor. Big studios were going bankrupt, and the big names, the big directors, were losing ground. Young people were going to Italian films, French films, Nouvelle Vague. How do you reach them? Mike Nichols made a film that was a lot rawer. Camera wise, he did things that were unique for Hollywood films today. Um, Also, it's a coming of age film with Dustin Hoffman, a young actor, interesting new face, where there's also this um, very interesting dualistic tension between an older generation and the younger generation. And the younger generation wants to break free, but the older generation can be very tempting, literally, in the form of uh, Mrs. I wanted to say Doubtfire, but Mrs. Robinson, of course, in the form of Mrs. Robinson, but also in the comfort that life brings. The film is much more critical uh, than just a breaking free coming of age film. It's pretty critical at the main character as well. Also, if you look at the last shot, I wonder, did Mike Nichols get his message across to Paul Simon? And was that what pulled him through to decide to work on the soundtrack for the film? Now, that collaboration is famous, and the song Mrs. Robinson is forever tied towards The Graduate, also written for the film. There are some other songs written for the film, but that is where the soundtrack comes in last because there are also a lot of songs that just do not are not original. Sounds of Silence is here. Scarborough Fair is here. Um, and when you look at the entire catalog, this is the record I put on the least because Mrs. Robinson was also done later on in their career in a. I prefer the later version. Mrs. Robinson returns here. Sounds of Silence also returns here. And I'm also wondering the part Mike Nichols played in the relationship of Simon and Garfunkel. Did this soundtrack really help them? Because it was done at a time in which Paul Simon was actually working with a writer's block. You know, in 1967, there were no Simon and Garfunkel albums made at a time in which artists would usually make two, sometimes even three records a year. Simon and Garfunkel were not that productive. Also, Mike Nichols was the one that, after The Graduate, offered both of them a part in their next film, Catch 22. And you know what? I'm going to talk more about that later. But the part of Mike Nichols in Simon and Garfunkel's career is more interesting. And it's a good soundtrack, obviously. But it's at 6 in this ranking of Simon and Garfunkel. I'm going to go to the number 5 spot. And this, again, is not an album which really impressed me. It's got a lot to do with the overall sound, um, but it's far from bad. Far from bad. It is a it's a good, fairly good album. Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. This is the first album by Simon and Garfunkel, released in 1964, and this is a acoustic folk duo collection of songs, and there are good songs here. There are good songs, and their harmonies are, of course, good. It contains the sound of silence, which is one of my favorite. I think everyone worldwide, it is one of the favorite Simon and Garfunkel songs. Also returning often in memes. Hello, darkness, my old friend, looking into a blank face or dead, dead eyes. It's produced by Tom Wilson, who is an interesting producer. He also worked famously on some of Bob Dylan's best albums, like Rolling Stone, for example. Now, this album flopped, and after their first album, the two separated. Paul Simon went to the UK, where he learned a lot, where he wrote a lot of songs, and Art Garfunkel went back to college just to study. At this moment in time, you just see two young men making an album. It doesn't do much, and they disband. But what happens later on? Tom Wilson, without their knowledge, adds a band to the Sounds of Silence. And then, out of nowhere, and I believe it was a year after this record, Sounds of Silence became a hit. They didn't know it. Paul Simon supposedly got the single, listened to it, hated it as much as you can hate a single, threw it against the wall, and thought they ruined his song. I disagree. I think Tom Wilson made a good choice there. It's just not very friendly to not inform the artist about it. And it opened new doors. And it opened new doors to the next record on the list, on number 4. Because Sounds of Silence was a hit, they had to make an album, Sounds of Silence. What I'm holding here is the first UK pressing. That is important to mention because the UK pressing includes a different song than the American one. It includes Homeward Bound. I think at this point they are incredible. They are spectacular. Paul Simon's songwriting on Sounds of Silence is magical. Opening with the Sounds of Silence, then Leaves That Are Green, and the leaves that are green turn brown. The melodies are so strong. Also lyrically, this man is mesmerizingly good. Somewhere they can't find me. Then side 2 here starts with Homeward Bound, but I'm gonna give another album also credit for Homeward Bound because this is not on the UK, on the US version, and I have the US version later on, in which the song appears. Richard Corey, incredible writing, A Most Peculiar Man, April Come She Will, and ending off with I Am a Rock. This is legend level. Why on the 4th spot then? Well, if there are so many good works to choose from, it's just hard to make a decision. Now, why the 4th spot then? The production is not yet at the level that Simon and Garfunkel later on became known for, because the production of later albums is spectacular. This was more of a rush job, recording wise, because songwriting wise, this is one of the highlights of Paul Simon. It is just incredible, and I really love the photograph. Always love this cover. Number uh, the fourth, the fourth spot, Sounds of Silence. At number three, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. Now, I always loved this album, but I was in the Bay Area about 2 months ago, and I walked into Amoeba Records in Berkeley. I also went to the Amoeba Records in San Francisco, and for $1, seriously, for $1, I found this first U.S. stereo pressing of Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, and I thought, if it's $1, I guess it should sound horrible. You know, it doesn't sound horrible. It's good quality Columbia pressing, nice thick cardboard, and the album itself. Um, Opening with Scarborough Fair, which was a song he picked up, Paul Simon picked up in the UK while he spent there, because he went there, as I just said, after the release of the first album, after flopping, after them disbanding, and he learned a beautiful old British folklore song. Um, and the way they recorded Scarborough Fair, that is where the magic of Simon and Garfunkel production becomes really noticeable. There is such a concentration in the sound, in the way they are singing, but also in the instruments, how gently it starts, and how well that sound is captured and then brought through the speakers. I mean, the quality of the sound, the quality of the production. It's not just audiophile freakiness. That is about setting an atmosphere, setting a scenery, and showing the musical brilliance, the texture, the audio, the timing, the musical narrative qualities of Paul Simon. This man was listening a lot to classical music, so he had examples of composers who knew their way using instruments to set a scene, to set a stage, to start off your narrative. And Scarborough Fair is such a gorgeous moment in which it is shown. Patterns cloudy, oof, so good. Also the tenderness in the vocals. It's then we get to Homeward Bound. This is the official U.S. release of Homeward Bound. He wrote that while somewhere in the north of the UK. He was lost. He was longing for New York, for Greenwich. And that tender, fragile playing, and then the lyrics. I'm sitting in the railway station, got a ticket for my destination. Last couple of months, I've been traveling a lot for work. I was filming with the Tour de France, which means that you wake up in a hotel one morning, you travel somewhere, a different town, hours of driving, where you have lunch or you film something. Then you have to travel because I'm a filmmaker, and then you travel a lot more to the finish line, and then you have to travel to another hotel. So it's live on the road, and every night you spend in a different hotel room. Most of the time you spend driving, and you're really lost. So this was my song during the Tour de France, Homeward Bound. I wish I was homeward bound, home. Ooh, I just love it. It's so incredible. Then side one ends up with the 59th Street Bridge song. Um, Used to play that song in a band on a wedding for the guitar player's wedding. So I've got a lot of romantic feelings with these songs. Then side two, the dangling conversation. Flowers never bend with the rainfall. Oof. For Emily, whenever I may find her. A poem on the underground wall. And then 7 o'clock news / silent night. That's also one of these um, really productions that is mesmerizing. What they do here is they have a beautiful rendition of Silent Night, which sets a Christmas like mood that is beyond comparison. They are so good at that. But they mix it with a collage of news items about, for example, Lenny Bruce's death, a lot of sadness. So it becomes a very cynical Christmas song. Yet there is an element of true Christmas beauty here. Masterpiece. Again, this is a masterpiece. 7 o'clock news, Silent Night. A masterpiece of production. The third spot's Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme. Number 2, Bridge over Troubled Water. Yeah, I'm gonna start this one off with a complaint. I've got 4 copies and none of them sound as good as I'd hope. So I'm really looking to find a perfect copy of this album because this is a perfect album. It's just a sound thing because the sound techniques of these men in the studio is incredible. Bridge over Troubled Water, opening side 1 with a song, I believe it was Phil Spector who said it sounds a lot like Let It Be, which may sound as a compliment. I think Phil Spector was complimenting himself. Bridge over Troubled Water nails Let It Be. Lyrically, um, it has this gospel element. It has this element of him in there. Um, a song that is searching for relief, a song that is searching for redemption. It is so pure. It is so lovely. It is so sweet. It's melodically so developed. Later on, Paul Simon said that he regretted not singing it himself, but that Art Garfunkel sang it. I was at his final show in the Netherlands, which was almost his last show. He then went to New York to do his really final show. After that, he stopped playing, and he played Bridge Over Troubled Water, and he did an incredible job. Yet, Art Garfunkel does do a good job here. I think Simon's remark has a lot to do with the tension in their relation at this point because this was released, it was 1970, I believe. Yeah, 1970. In 1969, they did not do an album, and the one before here was Bookends. And there was this rhythm in working. So Paul Simon would write a couple of songs. This is the way Art Garfunkel explained it. Um, Paul Simon would write a couple of songs. It took 3 or 4 months. Then they would go into the studio, or sometimes even 3 or 4 months. That's also why Parsley, Sage, and Rosemary and Thyme has that production sound, because it took 4 months to record that, and they decided we are gonna put all our effort into a good sounding album. Much by the chagrin of Columbia, because they thought, you spend so much time in the studio and you give me so little music. There was actually a moment when the boss of Columbia would give them a fatherly talk, and Simon and Garfunkel recorded that fatherly talk in a conversation just to laugh at it later. Paul Simon was convinced that the time he needed was the time it took. And Art Garfunkel was also easy going about that. And he said about the recording of this album, so there was always a moment in which Paul would work for himself and I would do other things. So in the other time, why not work on Catch 22 by Mike Nichols? Because Mike Nichols offered Art Garfunkel the part in Catch 22. Not a mesmerizing part, not really bad either, but there are more interesting performances in that film than Art Garfunkel. And I was really looking forward to seeing Art Garfunkel in that film, because Art Garfunkel in a Mike Nichols film in Catch 22. Now, I think something else went on there. I think Paul Simon must have felt lonely because they shared both of their names on a record. They shared in the success equally, in the all the compliments. Yet they'd go into the studio. Art Garfunkel would do his vocals, and then Paul Simon was left to himself to write the new material. If he wouldn't write, there would be no Simon and Garfunkel. So if Art Garfunkel would just go off and work for new success as an actor, and Paul Simon was left alone there, and all the weight was lying on his shoulders, I understand that he would become um, somewhat hostile, and would feel alone and neglected. Now, you don't feel that hostility on this album. This is a collection of songs that is of mesmerizing quality. After Bridge of Troubled Water, you get El Condor Pasa. I mean, that's an incredible song. Then Cecilia, Keep the Customer Satisfied, So Long, Frank Lloyd Wright. Side 2, The Boxer. Um, Amazing song. I'm just a poor boy, though my story seldom told. I've squandered my resistance for a pocket full of mumbles such as promises. It's, I mean, the melodies are so good. Baby Driver, a song a film was named after. I mean, there is a correlation between films and Simon and Garfunkel. You cannot deny it. Baby Driver, a film by, what's the name of the British director? He also made Shaun of the Dead and a lot of very good films. Baby Driver is an amazing film. Then The Only Living Boy in New York, another Simon and Garfunkel song that was made into a film, or they used a title for a film. Why Don't You Write Me? And the end of a song for asking, but the song before that is Bye Bye Love, an old Everly Brothers song, which was recorded live. And it's such a beautiful way to say goodbye. Such an amazing album. On the number 2 spot, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Now, number 1, there's only one album that remains, and I've always loved it. But about a year ago, I found the first US copy on the market here. And then I heard the full blown quality of what is Bookends. Wow. This is just amazing. A concept album, about a coming of age album. There is an element of loneliness in this record. There is an element of nostalgia. It's so full packed with gorgeous sounds, so much quality. Um, it's amazing how Paul Simon came to the point of writing all these things. And just to put in the light of what I was talking about, the way that they were driven apart, and most often the story is that Paul Simon was an asshole or something like that. Around this time, there's a documentary made, and you can see it online. And there's a scene in this documentary in which they are driving in a car, and Paul Simon is focused on how do I write melodies, how do I intertwine, how do I make it interesting, how do I make a challenging recording, how do I make a challenging composition, and out of that focus, out of that conviction, he's talking about Bach in that car towards Art Garfunkel. He's saying it's about the mesmerizing quality, about trying to understand it. You see that there is a lot of intellectual challenge going on at Paul Simon, trying to understand, trying to learn from him. And Art Garfunkel just looks out of the window. I don't like Bach. I don't think he's good at all. And though a lot of claims of arrogance have been pointed toward Paul Simon, and some may be understandable, I think it's also worthwhile to notice that when you are working on masterpieces and sharing the credits, cover wise, name wise, with somebody who just looks out the window and says, I can understand that a grudge is growing. Because if there's no recognition of the incredible, gorgeous beauty you are battling for, and he was battling for that, what's gone? What's left over? And this record is just the most incredible example of that gorgeous beauty. Bookends theme first, Save the Life of My Child, then America. That song is just so good. Let us be lovers, we'll marry our fortune together. I've got some real estate here in my bag. So he bought a pack of cigarettes and Mrs. Wagner spies and walked off to look for America. How does this man come up with these melodies? And not just the melody, the the lyrics as well, the way he's painting a picture of moving, of migrating, and there are so many layers and there are such challenging melodies. It's a masterpiece. Old Friends, it's a masterpiece of melancholy and nostalgia. Then side two, Faking It, Punky's Dilemma, which is really good. There are some leftovers from the Mrs. Robinson or the Mrs. Robinson sessions. Obviously the now I was just talking about that film and now I forgot the title. Something is very wrong with my head. The Graduate. Mrs. Robinson is here. It also says from the motion picture The Graduate. A hazy shade of winter at the zoo. So good. Oh, a master. But they've made four masterpieces. Four masterpieces. An incredible duo and an incredible writer. So I'm curious, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave a comment below. And just holding this up, their body of work. How would you rank these records? So leave a comment below and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.